make of the J.D. Vance MOU that was drawn up in Islamabad? Are you shocked that it gave Iran the right over the Strait of Hormuz, that it gave Lebanon sovereignty, that it gave Iran sovereignty? Um, or is that not the way to look at the MOU? It wasn't really a good faith memorandum of understanding in the first place.
Well, I think I think it's a really interesting question. I think the MOU is a not unreasonable reflection of the respective balance of power coming out of a war that the US and Israel initiated, where the US got very frustrated. The outcome that they had envisaged did not come about. And so that MOU, I think, gave a basis on which not only to end that US-Israel war against Iran, but also to build something different. The problems with it are manifold. But what you have is a paper of headlines. And if there was an understanding of, on the US side, of what they had committed to, and a good faith seriousness of purpose in seeing this through and in saying, now we're going to expand on this, we're going to put the details on there, then maybe this was the beginning of something. But that's not what we've seen across any of the fronts in which people who aren't versed in this material have been sent to negotiate on behalf of the United States, have reached these headline agreements, and then it's been all about the interpretation comes down to the relationships of power. So in Gaza, it's a terrible agreement. Israel has the power, and Israel has continued, and it occupies more of Gaza than when that agreement
Gaza's not in it.
Palestinians. Gaza's not in the MOU, but I'm saying if you look at the different agreements that the US has reached, because this is similar to the 20-point Gaza plan in some ways. What I'm saying is that these agreements lack seriousness and detail. So the JCPOA, the original Iran nuclear agreement between the P5+1 and Iran, that's 150 odd pages with the annexes. This was 2 pages. You need to fill out that detail. And so what I'm saying is it comes down to, is there a relationship of power in any given situation, which means that the text on paper can then be turned into something that the more powerful party seizes and uses to its benefit. In the Iran-US situation, I don't think the Americans were willing to follow through what they had agreed with Iran. They couldn't impose it on Iran because there is a different power equation there. And therefore, when the Iranians saw that what was written in the MOU, in Article 5, for instance, and Article 5 reads, upon signing, Iran will make arrangements for the safe passage of commercial vessels through Hormuz, I'm paraphrasing.
Iran runs
the Americans
the show.
Said, well, then the Americans said, no, and this is, as far as the Iranians, and I think anyone who objectively reads this text would say, wait a minute, the Americans then creating this passageway hugging the coast of Oman, insisting that vessels use that passageway, that's not what's in Article 5. Clearly, what America did between Israel and Lebanon is an abrogation of Article 1. The absence of unfreezing of the assets, I think, violates Article 10 or 11. So you have these series of things which confirmed to the Iranians that America was not serious. And then you begin to get back into this escalatory pattern. And I think that comes from a place where there was enough pushback within the US system to that MOU that Vance took the lead in reaching closure on. There was frustration with where things had gone. And so there was this, let's have another go at it. Let's see if we can create the circumstances for an Iranian capitulation by resuming the military efforts that we didn't do before. Of course, Israel was encouraging that, was feeding into that. Israel knows how also to deploy intel, whether real or cooked. So suddenly we hear news stories about Iranian assassination attempts on Trump. They know that's a great way of pulling Trump to your side. They deployed this thing about centrifuges being moved for Uranian enrichment to Pickaxe Mountain, which you mentioned already. And so unfortunately, in this current configuration, it comes down to one person. The unpredictability, the incoherence, the lack of strategy, and the ability to pull in your direction. A President Trump, even if he's been burned already by this war, he gets pulled back to the fire. It's interesting that Israel's not part thus far, as at the moment that we are talking, Afshin, of this resumed escalation. Is that because Trump still wants to control the escalation? And once Israel comes in, Israel has a tendency to try and take things up the escalatory ladder where America perhaps didn't want to go? Is it because Trump doesn't want to be quite so exposed to the accusation that this is an Israeli war, not an American war, Israel first versus America first? So let's be
Daniel Levy, I'll stop you there. More from the former Israeli peace negotiator under Israeli Prime Ministers Yitzhak Rabin and Ehud Barak after this break.
In the warm spring of 1945, it felt as though world peace had come for good.
They are determined to be united with each other and with all peace-loving nations, so that the ideal of lasting peace will become a reality.
I think the Cold War began with the death of Roosevelt, and Churchill was a Cold War warrior.
Churchill, der hatte die Idee, Russland mit Hilfe der deutschen Kriegsgefangenen, das waren 100.000 Mann, nach dem Motto:
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
Operation Unthinkable and Pincer and Broiler and Bushwhacker and Drop Shot, I mean, all of these were essentially plans to directly attack and destroy the Soviet Union.
Why did the peace so many had longed for give way to a new, protracted war? When exactly did the post-war world take a fateful turn?
Welcome back to Going Underground. I'm still here with Daniel Levy, president of the U.S. Middle East Project and former Israeli peace negotiator under Israeli Prime Ministers Yitzhak Rabin and Ehud Barak. You were talking about pushback in the American system. I think that's a euphemism for the Israel lobby, but you're also talking about Israel's role. One symptom, perhaps, that the whole thing is theater is that, and it relates to what you were saying about why Israel has been relatively quiet in the Gulf. The finance minister Smotrich said, let the U.S. do things. What did you make of the fact that he said, let the Americans deal with Iran, not Israel?
Well, there's something remarkable, isn't there, about this current Israeli government, which is they talk in plain, transparent language about their actual intentions. So much of the story of the last years has been, if you read between the lines, if you look at the evidence on the ground, then clearly this is what Israel's trying to do. You don't even have to do that anymore. You just say, well, let me quote this senior Israeli figure to you. And then you get the most damning evidence when it comes to the genocidal actions in Gaza, when it comes to Israel's intentions vis-a-vis the Palestinians, and also on something like this. So the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, has turned around and said, this is good. Let America fight this war. And I think some Americans have turned around and said, well, thank you for the clarity, Mr. Finance Minister. Now we at least know this is what we're good for. We're supposed to fight your wars for you. I don't want to, though, get overly narrow on this, because Smotrich doesn't necessarily, he speaks for a cohort in that system. But I think if you go beyond what Smotrich represents, then I do think the Israeli system and the Israeli prime minister, with his own political needs in what is already an election campaign, I think they are looking at this and saying, is this another American escalation which is going to be short-lived? And then they're going to be back telling us you're not allowed to bomb. There's a ceasefire. We're into a deal-making space. Or is this going to be something that moves closer to the direction Israel wants to take this war in. And I think, there's the American calculation of Israel's involvement at this stage. There's the Iranian calculation, and then there's the Israeli calculation. And I think what the Israeli side wants to know before they get involved again is, are the Americans going to show more resilience, more longevity, more a higher pain threshold this time around? And then it's worth us getting stuck in again. And I think the answer to that is not yet known. There's also the political question. Can Netanyahu get the meeting with Trump? Can Netanyahu get that backing from Trump again? Remember, this is an Israeli prime minister who in the first 13 months of the second Trump term had 7 face-to-face meetings with the president, but the last was in February. So in the several months that they've been in a war together, they have not met face-to-face. Netanyahu desperately does not want this to be the cold shower that Zelensky received in Washington in February 2025, but he desperately wants Trump back on side in the war, in the election campaign, and he wants that meeting at the Lindsey Graham funeral.
Yeah, there's been flip-flopping on whether there's an Oval Office meeting as regards Netanyahu coming to D.C. for the Lindsey Graham funeral. If the pain threshold is suitably high, what about it personally for J.D. Vance? Unless I don't understand what's going on, it does appear that J.D. Vance really believes in certain things, certain concepts, certain geopolitical concepts about America. Do you think Vance is going to pay a big price for his comments, for revealing Israel's sabotage attempts against a deal with Iran? And how do you think he lives in Washington, knowing how much of the lobby despises him?
This is the fascinating thing, right? We all assume, we have no reason not to, that Vice President J.D. Vance has ambitions to go one level higher in the political office that he holds. We all assume that one of his main contenders, if there is indeed a Republican primary for the 28 election, that one of his main contenders will be Secretary of State National Security Advisor Marco Rubio, right? So that's the world in which we're all assuming we are operating. So the fascinating thing for me is that J.D. Vance clearly sees, he's clearly made a political calculation. He sees political advantage in a Republican political setting in taking these positions vis-a-vis Israel. This isn't, there may well be an ideological conviction here, but he is not saying, look, so much for my political ambitions. I don't care whether I'm well placed to be president if I say this or not. This is the hill I'm going to die on. I don't believe that for one moment. I believe that J.D. Vance is making a political calculation that this will help him. And that, to me, is an absolute sea change in American politics, almost irrespective of whether it comes off or not. The fact that a leading Republican contender for the presidency has said, this is how I'm going to approach trying to get the nomination. This is going to be one of the building blocks for my candidacy, tells us so much about the shift in the American political scene when it comes to Israel. We know, and that's happening on the Republican MAGA side. We know on the Democrat side that there is this contestation between those who say, listen to our voters, listen to why Kamala Harris lost, why people weren't mobilized, enthused. One of those reasons was our appalling position on Gaza. We have to do better. We have to change. And there are others who are saying, yeah, but we're not actually going to change. Can we just pretend that we care and get on with policy as usual? So that's where Rahm Emanuel comes in, visits Israel, does a speech about the 23-state solution, pretends that the only problem here is Netanyahu, and pretends he's listening to voters, but he tries to keep America actually in lockstep with the lobby. All this is going to play out. What I'm saying is we are in unprecedented terrain when it comes to Israel in the American political debate. And at the same time, do not underestimate the capacity that the lobby still has to try and sway things in its favor, whether that's independent campaign expenditure, given how money can play a role in American politics, given whether that is how deeply embedded in Israeli narratives, American media and politics is. There's so much that they still have going for them, but it is game on, no doubt about it.
So assuming J.D. Vance's safety, where quasi-optimism from you, Daniel Levy. I mean, I do want to get onto Iran, but in the corollary to that is that's the end of the Greater Israel Project, because it could only have ever been supported it could only have happened with the backing of the United States, and a new demographic, a new sea change, as you call it, in American politics means that's the end of the kind of thing Mike Huckabee, the American ambassador to Israel at the moment, talks about.
So, not to ruin the optimism, but I'm going to slightly challenge that, because yes, Israel cannot hold down or cannot achieve that primacy. And Greater Israel is territorial.
Just to be clear to our audience, that's invading Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And,
okay, so
I don't know how far it goes. Iraq.
Well, here I want to draw an important distinction. When it comes to the territorial component, this is primarily about permanently displacing and ensuring that there is no Palestinian territory. It's a territorial Greater Israel that focuses on Palestine. Beyond that, though, there is the Greater Israel Project, which is, where does Israel's writ extend to? Where does Israel's dominion, where does Israel's capacity to shape and drive events, where does Israel's primacy extend to? And that, I think, is a much bigger regional project. Now, you're right to point out that not only today, but historically, there have been those in the Zionist movement, not insignificant figures, and those in today's Israeli government, not insignificant figures, who see territorial Greater Israel as from the Nile to the Euphrates, okay? I don't think that is the beating heart of the Israeli political gravity here. I think that is about the permanent replacement, displacement, eradication of a Palestinian national collective realizing its rights. Interestingly, Netanyahu harked back to some of these components in a speech just a few days ago, where so the founder of part of Greater Israel was the revisionist leader, Vladimir Jabotinsky. I'm not going to do a long history of Zionism. He's important because so many of today's figures kind of lean on that ideology. That ideology included Greater Israel. That ideology included something called the Iron Wall against an Iron Fist plus against all of Israel's neighbors. And Netanyahu talked about that, saying the wall is dynamic. It moves from theater to theater, including these security buffer zones. So to go to your question, can you do any of that without America? Can you succeed in that? I think it has already hit overreach. I don't think you can without America. I think it's already proved its limitations in this war against Iran. But one thing that we might just want to keep in the back of our minds is that perhaps Israeli leaders are saying, you know what, we can't keep America doing our bidding indefinitely. We're losing that public. America's not the power it was also. We don't live in a unipolar world of American preponderance, preeminence, primacy anymore. So let's use American power to tilt things as much in our favor while it's still there. If we can do that to create chaos in Iran still, if we can do that to push as many of the regional states into our orbit as possible, then maybe we can manage significant parts of this Greater Israel Project even after America is no longer there to do our bidding. That's being attempted. I don't think it's going to work. I think it holds great potential danger for Israel as well. But I think we should understand that that might be some of what we're seeing today.
And for the Iranian side, because we haven't really been talking about them, do you think, given that context, if you were advising their government, I mean, they presumably are looking at the domestic political fallout within the United States very closely. They're looking at trying to cope with their own opposition within Iran that believes that there's a lot of too many concessions, is the view on the street that we're hearing from in Iran, that Aragchi and the rest are giving the United States. But at the same time, the U.S. military presence here in West Asia is up for grabs. I mean, how would you see the Iranian position developing? Is it just now they're looking at the domestic politics and keeping this low-key bombing? I mean, it's not low-key bombing to the people who are being killed, clearly, and those being displaced. But is that how Iran sees it?
I can speak to the people who I take seriously, who are deep in the weeds of that. And my assumption based on that is that Iran looks at this and it says, yes, our losses are more significant. The damage to our country is more significant. The damage to our economy is more significant. But then let's factor in what we referred to earlier. Let's factor in relative pain thresholds, not absolute. In absolute terms, Iranian losses are greater. But in terms of what the respective systems can absorb, I think they would still look at this and say, the Americans can't sustain this. The Americans can't sustain petrol prices at the pump above a certain level. The Americans, we can see they don't want to put troops on the ground. With 20 body bags is, I'm sure for the people who lost their lives, their families, is a terrible loss for them. But it's sustainable, but not if that number ticks up and ticks up. What does it do to the midterms? What does it do to the markets? So I think they look at this. It's a very unpopular war with the American public. Look at the grilling this week that War Secretary Hegseth took in the Senate. That is, again, unprecedented terrain, just months into a military effort against a country that has been, held up as the ultimate enemy in America for so long. And yet there he is being grilled on what the hell is going on with this war and its costs. So I think the Iranian calculation would be, we can sustain this longer than them. And that has been an accurate calculation until now. The short term is that you still have an American system that doesn't seem to have a joined up strategy, doesn't seem to know what it wants to get out of this, thought it was on a cakewalk here, and it's been anything but.
Daniel Levy, thank you.
Thank you, Oshin.
And that's it for the show. Our continued condolences to all those of you bereaved or affected by today's NATO nation wars of aggression. We'll be back on Monday with the former head of Israel's secret intelligence agency, Shin Bet. Until then, keep in touch via all our social media if it's not censored in your country. And head to our channel, Going Underground TV on rumble.com to watch new and old episodes of Going Underground. See you Monday.
The deep state has its hands in everything. I was in the middle of it for decades. When I blew the whistle on CIA torture, the deep state turned on me. They ruined my life, took away my rights, threw me in prison, but they didn't break me. I fought back, and I still do. I'm John Kiriakou. On my show, The Deep State, I take you behind the geopolitical moves, the color revolutions, behind the politics and the politicians. We shine a light on where the deep state is hiding.
The fact that Israel was allowed to kill international law and violate it in such a horrible manner, allowing 3 war crimes to take place at the same time, the war crime of genocide, the war crime of collective punishment, including starvation, and then ethnic cleansing. The fact that it was allowed encouraged many other parties in the world to violate international law.
The war on Iran widens. Yemen and Saudi Arabia trade fire as Houthis hit the Jazan Red Sea oil refinery after Riyadh strikes a port controlled by the Houthis. Russia carries out a strike on a Ukrainian arms expo, showcasing drones outside of Kiev. Moscow says that the event was attended by developers, high-ranking military and intelligence officers who have been greenlighting attacks on Russian civilians. And 6 people are killed in the Ukrainian strike on a civilian infrastructure in Russia's central Kirov region. While in the northwest, warehouses belonging to Russia's e-commerce giant Wildberries come under attack. But thanks for staying with RT International. With all the news updates, I am Mike Okwacha with the latest. Now, our top story this hour has to begin with the Middle East, where Saudi Arabia and Yemen have exchanged a series of strikes. Footage here of the Saudi Aramco oil refinery complex on the coast of the Red Sea following overnight attacks by the Houthi group. Now, according to reports, the strike on the vast facility was carried out by at least 5 ballistic missiles and drones. Now, in the aftermath, electricity in various areas of Jazan province was reportedly cut off. Now, all this follows a Saudi strike on a port controlled by the Houthis, also known as Ansarullah. Now, this unverified footage circulating on social media is said to be of the port of Hodeida. Now, RT correspondent Jamal Al-Ashwal has more on this.
According to information provided by the Yemeni news agency affiliated with the Sana'a-based government, a series of airstrikes targeted the buildings and civilian facilities of the General Telecommunication Corporation in the city of Hodeida. As a result of these attacks, reports were received indicating that other sites were also hit, including Kamaran Island, located in the Red Sea and administratively belonging to the Hodeida Governorate, where a woman was injured due to the shelling. Since the Telecommunication Corporation's facilities are located near the eastern gate of the port of Hodeida, some structures in the port area were also damaged. According to reports provided by the Sana'a government, Saudi fighter jets launched a series of airstrikes on the port of Hodeida. However, there are no reports yet on the extent of damage caused to the port's facilities or transport infrastructure. These strikes followed reports of an attack on an oil vessel at sea, which had occurred just a few hours earlier. Nonetheless, the Sana'a government has not yet claimed responsibility for that operation. Earlier, an official spokesperson for the Sana'a military confirmed an attack on 2 Saudi oil tankers in the Red Sea, noting that such actions would continue if Saudi Arabia does not respond to the demands of Sana'a and the people of Yemen to lift the blockade on ports and airports, pay public employees' salaries from oil and gas revenues, and cease foreign interference in Yemen's internal affairs. These developments are taking place against the backdrop of mediation efforts by Oman, which are aimed at resolving the current situation. However, at present, it appears these negotiations have not yielded positive results. We hope that in the coming hours, these mediation initiatives will help reduce tensions.
And it comes after 2 Saudi oil tankers were hit in the Red Sea earlier this week over what the Houthis say was a breach of their maritime blockade of the Bab al-Mandab Strait. The group has pledged even more attacks if Riyadh escalates the conflict. A Houthi military spokesperson warned that any Saudi attack on Yemen would trigger retaliation strikes.
The Yemeni armed forces carried out a qualitative military operation targeting 2 Saudi oil tankers that violated the ban issued by the armed forces in the Red Sea, a number of ballistic and cruise missiles and drones. In the same context, the Yemeni armed forces forced about 10 ships to retreat and return. It affirms to the Saudi enemy that any foolishness or aggression targeting our country will be met with major operations deep within its territory, and the consequences will be dire for it.
Now, the Houthis have accused Riyadh of being behind last week's bombing of Yemen's Sana'a International Airport. And amid the group's maritime blockade, there's been no indication that the Houthis have decided to block any other nation besides Saudi Arabia from transiting the Bab al-Mandab Strait. Now, we heard from a spokesperson for the Ansarullah movement who says that Yemen has the right to respond to aggression.
It was Saudi Arabia that bombed Sana'a International Airport and continues to impose an air, land, and sea blockade on Yemen. Therefore, it is only natural for Yemen to respond to Saudi Arabia, which is blockading it. Saudi Arabia is not directly attacking Iran. It is not imposing a blockade on Iran. Rather, it is attacking and blockading Yemen. Therefore, Yemen's response is entirely natural. In any case, as I have said, we are targeting only Saudi Arabia because it is enforcing an unjust blockade against Yemen. However, if any other country becomes involved in the aggression against Yemen, whether it is the United States, the United Kingdom, Israel, or another country in the region, we will respond. They should respect and appreciate the immense humanitarian suffering endured by the Yemeni people. There is hunger, there is malnutrition, and there is widespread suffering. Even Yemeni business owners are struggling as a result of the unjust blockade, with many commercial goods being held for several months, sometimes for as long as 5 months. This causes significant losses for Yemeni traders and also drives up the prices of goods in Yemen, despite the country's limited economic resources and the very weak purchasing power of the Yemeni people.
And to the Russia-Ukraine war now, the Russian Defense Ministry reports that it struck a military expo showcasing drone technology in the suburbs of Kiev. Now, according to Moscow, the UAVs presented there are the types used to strike civilians on Russian territory.
The Russian armed forces launched a strike using long-range precision-guided weapons against a facility in the Kiev suburbs where a demonstration of UAVs, including advanced Ukrainian and foreign-made ones used for strikes against civilian targets in Russia, was being conducted.
Well, at the time of the strike, the facility hosted leading UAV developers, Ukraine's military drone commanders, and intelligence officers. Now, these are the very individuals responsible for orchestrating, funding, and carrying out waves and waves of attacks across Russian soil. Now, all this as Ukrainian drones are continuously used to hit civilian infrastructure across the country. And I'm going to show you that on this map right now. Today, Russian air defenses intercepted and destroyed 328 Ukrainian drones across 22 regions and the Sea of Azov during an overnight wave of attacks. You can see all of that across the map here around the country. Now, this follows tragic events yesterday when 6 civilians were killed and dozens were wounded during Ukrainian strikes on Russia's Kirov region. We've reported about this over and over again. Meanwhile, 4 people were injured after strikes directly hit warehouses belonging to Wildberries, Russia's largest e-commerce retailer in the nation's northwest. Now, in response, Russia launched retaliatory strikes on Ukrainian ports used to receive and store military cargo and fuel. Now, according to the Russian Defense Ministry, precision strikes in the port of Odessa were carried out. Down the coast in the port of Izmail on the Romanian border, the attacks targeted fuel storage facilities alongside a military warehouse. Now, meanwhile, in Nikolaev, a cargo vessel was struck as it was offloading military shipments for the Ukrainian armed forces. Now, earlier, we spoke to a former U.S. Army officer, Stanislav Krapivnik, who said that Ukraine's targeting of civilian infrastructure is part of a deliberate Western strategy to pressure Russia.
Look, you know, there are hundreds of photos on the internet, on various Telegram channels, where Ukrainians are shown using their apartments to put together drones, little mini drone factories, they call it. So basically, they're making sure to turn into their own apartments into little mini war factories, which means legal targets, legal military targets. It's just simple. If you're making military-grade weapons, or any grade weapons in a conflict, you are now a legal target. Whether that happens to be, by the way, in Ukraine, or that happens to be in Italy, France, or Germany, or England. If they're manufacturing weapons that are used to kill Russian civilians, they're making themselves a legal target. Let's be realistic. The U.S. has told Ukraine to up the pressure to try to force Russia to negotiation tables and force a ceasefire into Russia. That would be something to allow them to rearm Ukraine. This is part of that effort. I mean, this is, by the way, let's not forget that Mr. Trump, back in March of 2025, told Zelensky to start striking into Moscow, expand his strikes. He supported it. So this isn't anything new from the Western side that they're pushing it. They're just now making excuses. They cannot hit military targets. They're too hardened. Government targets are too hardened. What are they going after? They're going after the economic targets. This is terrorism, absolutely terrorism. But this is nothing new from the West. The West is a terrorist entity.
Now, Kiev has long tried to dismiss its deep-rooted neo-Nazi ideology, but it is impossible to deny this when the nation's new top military commander insists an entire group of people have no right to exist. Now, RT correspondent Roman Kosarev has the story.
The core of today's Ukrainian military is made up of proud Nazi descendants, judging from Kiev's current glorification of Hitler collaborators like Bandera, Melnik, and dozens of others. To them, the war against Russia is something that their grandfathers have passed down. Supposedly, the Russians are a cancer that must be cut out. This stance has been openly proclaimed by the new commander-in-chief of Kiev's army, Mikhail Drapati.
You can't even call them neighbors at all. A nation with a leadership that has no right to exist in anything civilized. It hasn't changed for 1,000 years, neither in mentality nor in imperial ambition. Therefore, even before 2014, I had suspected that war was unavoidable.
The predominantly Russian-speaking population of the Donbass has always been somewhat of a thorn for Western Ukraine, where Mikhail Drapati comes from.
The Donetsk and Lugansk regions, unfortunately throughout their entire history, have largely had a lot of migrants and criminal elements present. That's why there is such an oblivious population there. That's my opinion. You can agree or disagree, but regarding the population in terms of Ukrainianization, probably too little attention was paid there, and we have this result.
But this narrative was conceived long before Drapati rose through the ranks of Kiev's military.
I believe that if today you live in the temporarily occupied territory of Donbass and you think that our cause is just we belong to Russia, we are Russians, it is a big mistake to keep living in the Donbass, because without Ukraine there will be no civilization on this territory.
These are sick territories, mentally as well. There is the option of resection, complete amputation, and we leave them behind or we treat them. I am for therapy, I am for treatment, and full restoration of our body.
I recently, about a year ago, read the diaries of Oles Gonchar. If Ukraine, he writes, wants to develop as a free state, a free one, it must cut off the cancerous tumor called Donbass.
We talked so much about genetics in Zaporozhye and Donbass, but these are imported cities. Our genetics are not there.
Turning Ukraine into a so-called anti-Russian state seemed to have been the backbone of Kiev's coup-installed government. One of the very first acts by the new parliament, just a day after the coup in February of 2014, was to repeal the law that granted Russian language equal rights along with Ukrainian in areas where it was spoken by at least 10% of the population. That provocation immediately sparked violent protests in the east of the country, where the Russian-speaking population was predominant. Shortly after, the new Kiev regime began its armed aggression against irregular civilians. More than 8,000 people have been killed in the Donbass alone since then, including at least 243 children. They were all terrorists in the eyes of the newly formed Kiev regime. Drapati was among the first to show so-called bravery against unarmed civilians as his infantry fighting vehicle attempted to ram ordinary citizens of Mariupol back in 2014. So that's the Kiev regime and its Russophobia-ridden ideology in a nutshell. Their response?
Ukraine, I used to think that this was a country full of Nazis. I'm just trying to convey.
So, can you draw any parallels with the previous century? Roman Kosarev, RT, Donetsk Republic.
And moving ahead now, RT correspondent Steve Sweeney has provided testimony to a UN assessment team investigating attacks on journalists in Lebanon. And that's after he survived an Israeli strike while reporting this past March.
Further rocket attacks were reported against Nahariya and a minute.
Now, Steve Sweeney told us what investigators wanted to know and what he hopes will come of this inquiry.
So earlier this week, we met with a UN assessments team, and they've been on the ground in Lebanon. They're gathering testimonies from both the survivors of Israeli attacks and also the families of our journalist colleagues and friends that have unfortunately been killed in the line of duty. Now, obviously with us, they focused quite heavily on the attack on us on March the 18th when we were very, very lucky to escape with our lives after an Israeli missile strike on the Asmia Bridge in Tyre district in southern Lebanon. So they went over really the logistics of the day itself. They went into very fine detail. So we gave our testimony of what happened, what exactly happened on that day on the bridge, that we were clearly identified as press, that we had our press jackets on, our vehicle was identified as press, and that we've been working on the ground in the south of Lebanon for the best part of 2 years now. So the Israelis, the Lebanese military, UNIFIL, they're all aware of our vehicle, the vehicle registration, and we always give the details and the information to a number of teams as to where we're going on that day. We always seek the appropriate permission. So as we explained, that there was no doubt in our minds that this was a deliberate strike, a deliberate attack, and it was aimed at killing us and silencing the voices of journalists, particularly those that are critical of the Israeli aggression and the Israeli invasion of the south of the country. Now, well, what we'd hope to see from the final report is some kind of action taken against Israel. Whether that happens or not, well, we don't remain overly optimistic about that, to be perfectly honest with you. Like we said, 27 journalists have been killed since October 2023. What happens with this latest report, we're not entirely sure. It's going to be escalated to perhaps the UN Security Council. There may be, or there's been talk of some kind of international tribunal. But as for the outcome, well, Israel continues to act with impunity. So we don't really hold out that much hope.
Now, according to a veteran Israeli peace negotiator and advisor to former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, the Israel-Lebanon deal is proof for Iran that